topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Everybody, and welcome to Triversity Talk. I am your host, Wendy Stewart. I am so happy to have you here with me tonight. It's summer. I know it's April, but it's summer, and I am a summer person, and I'm just feeling so good with this 80-degree weather. So it's been a really wonderful time with our organization, Triversity, in Milford, Pennsylvania. As I always reiterate, we service the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. But we have a wonderful center right in town, and we came up with an idea to try and bring our community closer together. There has been such polarization with what's going on in school boards all over, transphobic remarks, banning of books. But I don't want to dwell on that. I want to talk about the positive actions people can take. I'm so proud of my organization. They came up with an idea to paint rocks with really loving messages on them and just literally plant them all over. Love equals love, telling people that they need to have respect for each other. Well, I can't believe it, how these rocks have affected people. Businesses are excited when they find them. And then in addition to that, they came up with signs about just, loving each other, treating each other with respect. The signs are lovely and the lettering is in rainbow. And once again, if you go to Milford, Pennsylvania, and some of the areas beyond, they've taken these signs and they put them in front of their houses, their businesses. We also had a local politician come into our center to learn more about us and ended up doing a rock project. And some of our members or board members were there to talk to this person. And by the time he left, he was completely behind our LGBTQ plus organization. That is the power of what you can do with communicating. And that is actually the power of art. And that is what tonight's show is really about, the transformative power of the arts in the LGBTQ plus community. I came upon an amazing person named Patrick Owens, who told me he was involved with an organization called Visual AIDS, which I had heard about, which raised awareness on World AIDS Day initially by having a day without art. What would a day without art be like? How empty would that be? How important it is to have art in our community. So Patrick Owens connected me with Esther McGowan, who is now the executive director of Visual AIDS, and I'm thrilled to welcome them both on the show today. Patrick Owens and Esther McGowan, welcome. Thank you so much for being here and being able to share your expertise. Now, from what I understand, and always correct me if I'm wrong, because I do tend to ramble on sometimes. You both met when you were working with Visual AIDS. Patrick, you were on the board of directors, and Esther, you had some different positions there, did you not?
Yes, I started in 2012. I was hired as the associate director, and I met Pat then because he was on the board, and he stayed on the board for throughout really my tenure here. After 5 years as associate director, our executive director left, and I was promoted to be the ED. And throughout all that time, Pat was on the board and an amazing board member, working really hard. At one point was the board treasurer and helping me with all the finances. So much appreciated. Yeah.
Wow. So Visual Aids was started 1988.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So that was really, from my recollection, the height of when everything was just awful. We didn't really have cocktails yet. We had what I call the Dallas buyer drugs were actually out because I helped more than a few people get those, what we called off-label drugs. Those people are alive today. So what was the call to action to start Visual Aids?
Sure. Pat, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, I mean, I was around visual aids at that time, so this is much earlier before I joined the board. But there were a couple of things that were going on. I mean, first of all, there was artists came together because they really wanted to raise awareness of what was going on, and they were raise awareness in a couple of ways. One, the profound loss that the art world was feeling, and also the loss of artists and their work.
Yeah.
So and this was Visual Aids really started as a collective of artists, and when and they came together, and one of the first projects was actually the Red Ribbon Project. Everyone knows the Red Ribbon, and it was really about people coming together and creating what called ribbon bees, like sewing bees. Where people created just a simple red ribbon with a pin. And there's a very famous image of, I think, Jeremy Irons at I think the Tonys or the Academy Award wearing it on his lapel, and and that brought attention to the devastation of AIDS, and so it was really created by artists. And then at the same time, there was a lot of artists who were dying, who were making work. Their families had maybe abandoned them or didn't want to know about them or know about their work.
Exactly what happened. Yeah.
And so what happened? So what we were seeing at the time, where after artists died, their apartments or their studios full of artwork were just thrown into dumpsters. And Frank Moore, a well-known artist at the time, thought that was kind of devastating. Like, we can't do that, and started an archive project, which was just taking. Everyone remembers like little slides people had at the time, and he said we need to keep the memory of that work and keep that work alive. And so they would take the slides and create a slide registry. And originally that slide registry was just light boxes with a rows of slides of the artist's work, so the artist's work could live on after their death. And that, I think, became that built on the momentum where artists came together, artists who were working as artists, working in galleries, working in museums, working as curators, really came together in a very, I would say, almost pure activist collective format.
It definitely is an activist position on this. Yeah.
And to raise awareness and to really bring it forward. And I think, and as the organization then began to get a little more formalized and in terms of its organization, and then started on a lot of other projects, including Day Without Art. And Day Without Art really was this idea that, well, how can we bring attention to the fact that if artists weren't around, the artwork wouldn't be around. And so these artists were literally knocking on doors of museums and galleries, and all they did at that time was ask, just cover one painting with black cloth or white cloth, just cover it on that day. And it was so profound, and it really built on that. And and then Esther, after that, I think that's when the momentum of the programs and the organization really started to grow. No.
Yeah, and I think that was interesting to point out, as Wendy, you mentioned, living through the AIDS crisis, so many people were dying young. And so one of the things that Visual Aids was able to do is support people who did not have a lot of other support systems. When you're in your 20s, you don't have a lot of money. You don't even necessarily have a good job that's going to support you. People didn't have health insurance. And so what groups like Visual Aids were able to do is come together to create these support systems for people in whatever way they could. So for Visual Aids, it was about the art and really helping artists to, as Pat described, document their work, make sure the work wasn't lost, provide them with a community of people who could work with them to also provide support around activism. one of the things that Visual Aids does, I always like to describe our mission as kind of twofold, because we look at, the name of your show is the transformative power of the arts. And I think that we look at the transformative power of art in two ways. You have the power of art itself in activism. When you look at an incredible image, when an artist has created something beautiful, it has so much power that really transforms activism. And it was true at the time, with someone holding up a sign, someone creating incredible posters like "Silence equals death." These are things that we remember, and they come into the collective consciousness. And the thing that you remember is really the art. It's what you're seeing. It jumps out at you. And that's true in all activism, Black Lives Matter, any type of activism. When you have a really powerful image, it really creates something beyond what was there before.
Well, yeah, it totally impacts a person. I'm starting to feel more and more that the way we can bridge the divide in this country is through art. Because that it's a common language for people is art, and someone's reaction to a piece of art, it'll leave an imprint on the person. It'll make the person think, whereas me talking at someone politically trying to change their mind or affect the way they think, you can see it just like they're not listening at all. Yeah. But I do feel that if you have an impactful piece of art, that's something that a person will take with them. They'll have the visual picture in their head and they will walk away with that.
Yeah. And we see that now, at the time, sorry, Pat, just to finish the thought, at the time we were seeing, and still today, we have in-person protests with signs. There was, what you would see on television back in the day, 88, 89, it was public access cable.
Yeah, it was.
We were seeing a lot of this. Now we have Instagram and we have TikTok. Right. So what I find so fascinating is that the power of visuals has only grown in our society. We have even more ways for people to experience art, photography, video, powerful activist video. So that's something that Visual Aids has done consistently since the late 80s. And one of the things that I think I'm very proud of in terms of how we've grown as an organization, because the AIDS crisis is still happening. People tend to think, okay, AIDS was something that happened in the 80s and 90s. Absolutely. That's not true. But it has changed. We have medications now. People are living longer. We work with many people who are called long-term survivors, meaning they've been living with HIV for 20, 30 plus years.
And so many. Yeah, right.
Absolutely. So the needs are different. In the early days of the AIDS crisis was something like Day Without Art, and even the creation of our archive that Pat was describing, it was about death. It was about losing people, about mourning, about loss, about helping people to deal with and also actively fight against what was going on, which was really had this very powerful sense of desperation, because all of these people were dying and there seemed to be nothing that was being done about it. As that shifted and it's become about medications, about people living longer, there are many, many issues now, but they're different. And so Visual Aids program has grown and changed. So something like Day Without Art still exists. We've done it every year since 1989, but it's now about people, artists, activists creating new work. We now work almost exclusively with video. Every year we commission new videos that are about contemporary issues, what it's like to live with HIV, what it's like to be a young person newly diagnosed, what it's like to be someone in their 70s who's been living with HIV for 30 plus years. What are the political issues around pharmaceuticals, all of these new and different issues, but very much also sharing the idea that the AIDS crisis and the AIDS pandemic is very much still here. And then now, of course, remembering we're in another pandemic. So people living with HIV are living through two pandemics at the same time.
Well, it's not only that, but anyone that has HIV is got a compromised immune system. Yeah. Yeah. So now it's a double whammy. You're worried about HIV and now you have to worry about getting COVID on top of it. The sheer amount of stress that lays onto a person. I think a lot of people are not thinking about that. They're not thinking about the people out there that have compromised immune systems from HIV. And now there's just another thing that has entered into their
Mhm.
lives. I'm curious, do you deal a lot with young people now that and how do you get them aware? Because I think to raise their awareness, they really need to know what happened before. So what is the approach to that?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I have found to be really true now is that young people are very interested in activism in general. You know, thinking about our world today, you have environmental activism, which is probably the most important activism for young people, Black Lives Matter, many things that have happened in the lives of someone who, say, is 25 or younger. The power of activism is something they understand. And so what I find is a kind of window into the history of HIV and AIDS is through the power of AIDS activism, because many, many young people now are so excited to learn about AIDS activism, which was really probably the most successful activism that happened. You know, you think about the ways in which ACT UP and other organizations,
Absolutely.
really, you know, they were able to create real change through their activism and save lives, and their methods and the types of protests, the types of broadsheets, posters, all of that work is something, and video also, activist video. And we find that young people are just really, really fascinated to learn about that. And that's the way that we're able to draw more younger people into the story of visual AIDS and also the story of AIDS activism. And then, you know, we find that a lot of young people are actually really amazing in terms of, you know, their interest and their desire to learn. But you do have many people who, again, as we just said, you know, the idea that AIDS is still a thing, you know, that's the thing that people say, is AIDS still a thing? You know, and it's like,
It's still a thing, right.
it is, you know.
I think, you know, Wendy, actually, bouncing off what Esther said, the one thing that's really unique about visual aids, and you touched on it, is that at its core, it's the power of art and the power of imagery to really activate the discussions around whether it's an action, whether it's engaging people to raise awareness. So, you know, even the red ribbon really was a direct response. If you remember, there was the yellow ribbon. People would tie a yellow ribbon around the tree. That's what that generated. And so and I think what younger people are understanding and really appreciating is how effective art is in bringing forward discussion, being a tool for activism. So it's for visual aids, it's really that combination of activism and art. And, you know, we always say, like,
in combination, right?
And, you know, and we see, you know, like, for example, ACT UP, you know, which was very effective, and their posters with silence equals death. And, you know, Esther and I were talking the other day, like, people are still using those strategies. When people look at, like, Nan Golden, who was, you know, with the pain with, you know, activists against the Sacklers, she was using the same, making art, little, you know, pill bottle sculptures and posters in the same way that she was familiar with in the days of, you know, ACT UP in the early days of visual aids. So we're always bringing it forward to make sure to remind people that, you know, art is still a very effective and very relevant tool to raise awareness, to provoke discussion. And that's why I think younger people are finding it really fascinating. And then once you dive into the history, you know, you realize that visual aids has been really on the vanguard of a lot of these discussions, but always rooted in, you know, the power of art to really activate those discussions.
Right. To really move people. Now, does visual aids go into schools with programs? I'm thinking that would be so brilliant. Esther, you say you do videos now, right?
Right.
So the teaching capacity here is quite incredible.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting too is the ability that people have now, the ease of access for video and historic video. You can literally just Google it and go on YouTube and really have access to this incredible wealth of history. Not only, you know, contemporary videos, but a lot of the incredible historic AIDS activist videos, artists like Nelson Sullivan, who were videotaping their lives, you know, in the 80s in the East Village and really capturing that time. But so visual aids, we do work in schools. We don't have a specific program that's for schools, but we invite schools to come to meet us, to look at our archive. We do a lot of work with college level classes and students. We often have students teachers will bring classes of students to our office, and we'll talk to them, and we will have them look through our archive. We'll explain the history of our activism and AIDS activism. We find that a lot of students at the high school and college level are actually really interested in studying activism. And so we get a lot of engagement that way. And we do also work with high school students. I actually have a class from a school in California that comes every year. They're coming on May 1st to meet us and to look at our work. And we also will, we do a lot of education programming in partnership with institutions like museums. So, we're small, and we do a lot of partnerships with places that are big. And what we do is we can bring the AIDS activist and the AIDS history and the knowledge of artists and HIV and AIDS and the power of art to a conversation with a museum. So, for example, if a museum is holding a large-scale exhibition of an artist who passed away as a result of HIV and AIDS, artists like Keith Haring, David Wojnarowicz, those are artists that are well known. What they will do is invite us to come and do a public program at the museum for their audience, where we can really bring the knowledge of HIV and AIDS and art and all the things we're talking about here. We can talk about that at the museum with the museum audience. And that's been a very successful area of programming for us. And we're kind of the go-to. We've kind of established ourselves as, if you are doing an HIV and AIDS program or want to bring in more knowledge, go to Visual AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
So. That's absolutely great. So I want to talk to each one of you and find out, where you came from and how this, commitment, right, all came about. Patrick, I can start with you because you're in the top square.
Sure. Well, actually, I was introduced to. I always knew about Visual AIDS, so and I was introduced to Visual AIDS. I'd say in a more formal way in the probably around 2008, 2009, and it had been where they'd gone to see certain exhibits, and but then I was invited to consider joining the board, and at that point, the board was mainly activists and mainly artists. I'm not an artist. Not an artist. I had a career as an investment banker, but I really loved what they were doing, and I was very excited and really honored to join the board. And when we, and I got to really understand even a more profound way just the potential of the organization. So, Visual AIDS is rather small when if you look at their annual report, but its impact is just enormous. And with that, I think certainly with Esther's leadership, we were able to really bring in a lot of what I consider high-profile partners, whether they were everything from museums to foundations to fashion brands, who really understood the impact of what we're doing, the creativity, but also what's really important, the authenticity. We are really, as an organization, we are really very, very careful about authentically representing the artists and the community partners we work with. So, for example,
I was going to. What do you mean by authentically representing?
That we are what we are doing is always consistent and always true to our mission, and we're not taking advantage of a situation. There's been a lot of, there's always kind of brand washing and brand burnishing. Let's get an organization, we'll sponsor them, and we'll just it'll make our brand look good. Esther has been very, very careful about, we, as Esther can tell you, lots of invitations to partner and participate. I think, Visual AIDS says no more than it says yes, because we really want to stay true to our mission. So, and, I think, one of the interesting things is when I joined the board, I was also working with someone at Dudonnet, which is a paper making mill and artist studio. And one of the board members there said, we should do something with Visual AIDS. I don't know what. And at that point, the Fire Island Artist Residency, a good friend of ours, Chris Boja, was just starting up. And Love Positive Women, which was an organization that really was a support group for HIV positive women. Jessica, based in Canada, had this idea of, let's do something. And she created something around Valentine's Day. And there was a spark that said, wait a minute, we can work with Dudonay and artists and visual aids and create Valentine's Day cards to send to HIV positive women, because HIV positive women are, we're feeling very left out of the conversation, very left out of the support network. And I was very, very proud to kind of coordinate that and bring that to the organization. And it's become one of visual aids, I'd say, more successful programs. So, and so I think being authentic is really understanding your work and not only the impact of your work, but your reach, to make sure that you are reaching all those people that really could benefit from either the support or the awareness that you provide.
Right. And not selling out at all. It seems like you carefully vetted anybody that you partnered with on that. And really, kudos to you. It's not easy nowadays. Everybody is vying for partnerships right now. Everyone's vying for dollars. And you're right. You probably get approached all over the place, but they have to meet a certain criteria. So thank you for keeping it so authentic.
And also to build on what Pat was saying about our Love Positive Women programming, that's another example of the ways in which visual aids has kind of shifted our programs in relation to what's going on in the AIDS crisis now. We think about the communities that are most impacted. Certainly, in the early days of the AIDS crisis, a lot of the focus was on gay men who were certainly deeply impacted and continue to be deeply impacted by HIV and AIDS. But as we've moved forward, and now in 2023, we think about women, we think about communities of color. And so as an HIV and AIDS organization, it's important for us to do our best to try to support all of the communities impacted by HIV and AIDS. And so our programming for women living with HIV is actually, as Pat said, has been very successful. This anti-stigma Valentine program, which is international, which Pat was describing, where artists and women living with HIV make handmade Valentines, which are sent to women.
I think it's such an incredibly beautiful, sensitive idea.
It is, and it's a really wonderful program, and we send Valentines to women in over 40 countries now, hundreds and hundreds of Valentines. And then we have also started something called a Women's Empowerment Art Therapy Workshop, which is for women living with HIV. It's monthly, and it happens in New York. So Love Positive Women is international. The Women's Empowerment Art Therapy Workshops are local to New York City right now, and they are about using the power of art making and the power of really looking at art and thinking about art as a form of empowerment, and also a way to create community for women living with HIV to be able to talk and to open them up, to speak to each other, to talk about what's going on in their lives, but also to kind of create these wonderful moments, particularly women who don't ever really make art, who don't think of themselves as artists, who may have never made art before. The power of just start sitting down and making a painting, making a sculpture, even if you think you can't do it, is really transformative. And this is also an area that we've grown a really interesting set of partnerships with museums. And what we do now is we bring all of the women in our workshops to a museum. Like, for example, next month, we're going to be at the Museum of Modern Art. And we are bringing them there to see an exhibition, which is up there right now, a cohort of artists and creators. It's called Black Power Naps. It was just in the news. You may have seen someone was actually—
I heard about it, but I don't know anything about it. Can you elaborate?
Well, this particular, I'm not an expert on this particular exhibition. The exhibition itself is designed to create a safe and contemplative space for people of color, and particularly Black folks, to be able to be in the space in a major museum. And there was a controversy recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, where there was a disagreement between a Black patron and a white patron within that exhibition, which resulted in the Black patron being asked to leave the museum. And it was, again, like the absolute opposite of the entire intention of the exhibition.
Right, exactly.
So it was a fascinating moment too, thinking about how institutions are relating to contemporary issues now, around equity and all of the things we're thinking about now. We'll be bringing our group to that exhibition. We'll be going through it. We'll be talking about it there with the curator, and then women will then be going into an education space and making sculptures that draw from the ideas in that exhibition. And we've been doing that with a lot of different museums in New York, the New Museum, Brooklyn Museum.
I'm loving this conversation, Esther, and me who's out there and I'm everywhere. I knew nothing about this. It is so incredible to me of what you're doing and how you're helping create community and safe spaces through art is really, really quite amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very proud of a lot of this work, and something also when Pat was talking about kind of authentically representing our communities. Yeah. I do want to point out, both of the programs that we just described that are for women were actually initiated by women living with HIV. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't us as an institution saying, "Oh, we should do this." It was women living with HIV in our communities coming to us and saying, "This is something we think is important. Can you support it?" Mm-hmm. And I think that's something, when you think about all of our work around HIV and AIDS, we always have to have the voices of people living with HIV in everything that we do, and to inform us, because, it's our staff, the majority of people on our staff are not living with HIV. The majority of our board members are not living with HIV. Some are. We're in a moment now where our board president is an HIV positive woman, long-term survivor. That's really powerful in terms of how the organization is led from the very top. Yeah. But, not everyone is. And so we always have to remember that we can have whatever ideas we want to have, but we have to really talk to our community to make sure that what we're doing actually has value.
Absolutely. You have to have that line of communication, and that is something you're well aware of. Well, I'd like to show your video. Okay. If we can just cue that up and look at that, because it talked about what you guys do.
Great.
Day Without Art Day. Day Without Art Day is an annual commemoration observed on December 1st of every year. AIDS has been a deadly disease ever since its inception. Day Without Art Day is an awareness day observed to raise, promote awareness about AIDS, mourn for the people who have died, and inspire affirmative action. The first occurrence of the Day Without Art Day was held in the year 1988. It's an awareness day that coincides with World AIDS Day. The purpose of commemorating this day is to promote awareness about AIDS. It's a day that takes action on spreading the awareness of this deadly disease and mourning in response to the worsening AIDS crisis. To make people aware that AIDS can touch everyone is another purpose of the day. To inspire positive action among the people, about 800 U.S. art and AIDS groups have participated in the first year celebration. They have shut down the museums, sent the staff to volunteer at AIDS services, and sponsored special exhibitions of work about AIDS. The name of this day itself will make people think what kind of place would be in the world without art and artists. So many artists have this AIDS. Since then, this day has grown into a collaborative project in which approximately 8,000 national and international organizations had taken part. It includes museums, galleries, art centers, libraries, high schools, colleges, and AIDS service organizations. Visual AIDS in 1998 had proposed that the name of the day be changed to Day with Art. They had done it to help promote the annual cultural events that in turn would help draw attention to the AIDS pandemic. On this day, indulge yourself in helping the people who are infected with AIDS, bringing awareness about this deadly disease, its symptoms, and preventative measures among the people. Mourn for the people who have died due to this disease. Pay your honor to those artists and their work who are suffering from this disease. You can visit the museums and art galleries that showcase their work. Post your Awareness Day celebrations on social media using the hashtag Day Without Art Day.
Thank you both.
Sure. I should say I don't. I think that video was made perhaps by one of our partners. I think in Asia. That was not a video that was made by Visual Aids.
It wasn't one of yours. Yeah, I just felt it really explained about what you did, and I was poking around online, which I love to do.
Yes. Yeah, no, that seems like, I think that was one of our, we have many international partners who really have embraced the project and work with us every year to share our videos with their audiences. And I think that was perhaps a video that was made by one of our partners in Asia. We've been doing a lot of work in Taiwan, for example.
Taiwan.
Yeah, recently we have a lot of wonderful partners there. And also all over the world. So yeah, it's wonderful to see someone else take the idea of Day Without Art and really embrace the history and importance of it for their audiences. That was to be honest, I've never seen that video before. And it was lovely to see that an outside take on what we're doing in such a passionate way. It was very lovely. Thank you for showing that. Yeah.
I saw it and I thought this really explains it to anyone watching, you know, the impact of what it is. So you deal all over the world. Are there areas that are just really kind of getting started connecting the power of transformative art with people that have HIV or AIDS?
Well, I think that, there are a lot of places in the world where there is still a huge amount of stigma. I would say, certainly everywhere in the world for people living with HIV. And again, I don't want to speak for people living with HIV, but there certainly is a lot of stigma still around.
I know in Africa, I've worked in Africa. I know in African countries.
Right, and so that's kind of what I was going to say is that there are artists and filmmakers that we work with around, particularly around Day Without Art, who have a very different experience of HIV and AIDS than we do in the United States. For example, in Uganda, places in other nations in Africa, there are nations in Asia as well. We did a video, a beautiful video a couple of years ago that was made by women living with HIV in Taiwan who, but part of it is they didn't show their faces because there's such a huge amount of stigma.
Involved with that.
Yeah, and then there are, places where people would be ostracized from their community. So there are often, when we work with artists around the world, it really reminds you, even though there are many issues for people living in the United States, including HIV criminalization and other things, there are places in the world where the experience of living with HIV is very different. And also around access to medications. Now you're getting into the cultural component, right? You go to access to medication, the stigma within the communities. Again, I can speak for Africa. I know it's huge over there. And the reaction and not being able to get the medications and everything, it really is quite a different experience than here. And we just had a really interesting film. We've had a couple of really interesting films recently from artists and filmmakers living in Mexico, because there are a lot of issues around access to medications in Mexico, having to do with government corruption. And, we had a film that was made by trans women living in Mexico about their relationship to living with HIV and their experience, again, which is very different. And we've been really fortunate and really grateful to a lot of incredible activists and artists around the world who are making these films and sharing them with us and being part of our programming. Because I do think it's important. Visual Aids is based in New York, and we have can have a New York-centric view sometimes of the world, no matter how much we try not to.
Oh my gosh, we definitely do. Yeah. I just had this discussion with someone today. I had on my other show from Ukraine. Our perception of a war in the Ukraine, and you can't wrap your head around it. So you always have to consider the cultural component. However, it's brilliant that you're based down in New York, because we are, a crossroads for the rest of the world.
Yeah. But one of the things we've tried to do especially in the last few years, it's been for many years, but one of our organizational focuses recently has been to really work with as many international artists as we can, both in terms of representing them in our archives and in our work, but also having them create work for us, like the film for Day Without Art. And I should do a little plug now.
Sure, go right ahead.
Anyone who is online can watch all of the films commissioned for Day Without Art on a dedicated website. I mean, there are two ways to do it. You can go to the Visual Aids website, which is visualaids.org. But then we have a dedicated website also where we've gathered all of the Day Without Art films and videos. And I believe it's video.visualaids.org. I think I have to.
Okay. And the first one you said is
visualaids.org, O-R-G. And we're always, we're not.
Juan, can you put a banner up for that? I'd like to have the banner on there so that it runs and people can
get it. Let me just double check it.
Thank you.
Video. I always forget how to.
And now there's an incredible archive of these videos that were created to be run on Day Without Art. And one thing I think that Esther mentioned, but I want to highlight. So these a series of like 4 or 5 videos are commissioned for Day Without Art every year, and we partner with a lot of universities around the country, in addition to museums, who basically create their own Day Without Art event using the videos that we've commissioned. So it's become a national event that lots of students and museum goers, even if they just happen to walk into a museum or a university, a lobby in a university library, these videos will be running all day on Day Without Art. So it's incredible reach.
There's also the power of video as an activist form and as an art form, because it's scalable. Someone can show the videos in a giant theater with an audience. They can, as Pat was describing, like put it on a loop in a gallery. They can even just put it on their website. People, or we can share it on Instagram and on,
Yeah, you have a really great reach with videos.
Yeah. And so many people, including and in particular young people, are so attuned to watching video right now. That's what people do all the time on their phone. They're watching video. So video has really only grown in strength as an activist form and as an art form, I think, which is really fascinating.
Go on.
And Esther, the video is kind of what happened in terms of as executive director of the New York Choral Society, working with the visual aids artists. So, we created video performances of choral works during the pandemic when we couldn't perform. And I invited Joyce McDonald, who's a well-known HIV positive artist and AIDS activist, to work with us on a performance of all things Shakespeare music. And Joyce created these incredible sculptures of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and which we curated and put in a short film to Shaker music. So I just love the idea that what visual aids is doing, what visual aids artists are doing, we can bring it forward to other forums. I mean, the people who listen to choral music and listen to Shaker music aren't your natural audience for an AIDS activist organization. But Joyce really represented the potential of what an HIV positive artist can do in terms of responding to not only Black Lives Matter, but to responding to her making the best use of her medium in a music format. So and that happens a lot. We see a lot of artists, visual aids artists, collaborating with other art forms, and really highlighting how vibrant the community of HIV positive artists is. I mean, that's really important.
Case in point, Patrick, I met you at Generations Project event, which is, it's the art of storytelling. It creates community. It gives people a voice. It's certainly creative, and it takes people that, like there are people that never think of themselves as artists, and yet you've put them together and they've created art. Storytelling is another kind of format. I think we really have to look at the power behind these art forms to create incredible content out there, because we can.
Yeah, and another very well-known AIDS activist piece is the AIDS memorial quilt.
Right.
And that's something that also, that is art. People creating these beautiful panels and to sort of bring the idea that, AIDS is still very much here. They are still creating new panels for the AIDS memorial quilt. And we actually partnered, one of our partnerships was with the New York City AIDS Memorial, who had created a project to bring people in to create new quilt panels this past year. And our Women's Empowerment Art Therapy workshop, the women in that program tributed people in their lives who had died, including one of the leaders of our program did a tribute to her son who died as a baby of AIDS. And, just really powerful. And so thinking about that piece, the AIDS Memorial Quilt, as a visual artistic representation of loss and what the AIDS crisis really is and has been to the world, it's all there in physical form, in the form of the quilt and the quilt panels. And and thinking about the ways in which people are still dying. And that's something that people need to remember.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, because and we hit on it a little bit. How did you fare during the pandemic? What kinds of programs did you have to come up with? Right, we all had to start thinking out of the box.
Yes, and so we were actually, it's really interesting. I'm very proud of what we accomplished. We actually did well during the pandemic, and one of the reasons was what we've been talking about: video. We were in the middle of making and commissioning all of these videos, which is something we were able to continue with. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were fortunate that most of our artists had finished making their videos by the time everyone had to stop everything and go home. And so we were able to continue to edit and finish that project and then release it the following in December of 2020. And what was interesting is we were able, because we were working with artists all over the world, we were able to do one event that was a launch event online that included artists from all over the world.
Right.
And like we are, just speaking together as though they were on a panel together. And that was really powerful. And one of the other things we were able to do during COVID was we transitioned, one of the things about visual aids is it's very much about community. And our office and our public events were always places of community for people living with HIV and AIDS to just, come by and visit and meet people and be together. And we transitioned that online, and we created something called office hours, which we started off doing once a week at the very beginning of the pandemic, when people were at home and it was so scary and people were
none of us knew.
We did office hours every week. And we invited artists from all over the world to just come on in a Zoom meeting and to see who was there. So it was actually really amazing because we were able to do something we had never done before, but to bring artists not just from New York, but from all over the world together to talk.
No, it's really incredible. All of a sudden, everybody is there from all over the world.
Yeah.
The screen becomes a big global family, and that's still so amazing to me.
Yeah, and you
wouldn't have had that reach before.
Yeah, and it made us realize, we could have been doing that type of online programming before. Before COVID, people didn't think about that. Something like doing a webinar was like, oh God, it sounds awful. I don't want to do that. Right. Now during COVID, we got so used to it that now more people are willing to just click on a Zoom meeting or a Zoom public event and come in, and they know what it's going to be. And so we've actually continued some of that programming. We're every couple of months now, we do an online program that's specifically about our archive, and we invite artists all over the world and audience members to come and talk. And that's something we've kept. And even one of our benefit events, we have this very popular benefit event called Postcards from the Edge, which we do every year, which is a sale of over 1,000 4x6-inch artworks that have been handmade by people all over the world to be sold.
Handmade, wow.
Yeah, they're the original artworks that people make, and we sell them. And we always hung them in a New York gallery, and people came to the gallery and bought them, and it was really fun. But it was very much about being in New York and coming to that gallery. And so during COVID, we did it all online, and we were reaching buyers all over the world. So we've kept doing it online because we realized, wait, this is actually better.
It's working, right?
Yeah.
It's working. It gets a bigger audience. Well, we are down to the last 2 minutes. I don't know where the time went. Each of you has can do your wrap up, what you'd like to tell our audience, how to reach you, what your vision is, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, I'd like to say just with, my experience with visual aids is, has been over 10 years now. And I'm always amazed how visual aids just generates other ideas and other projects. So even in my current role as executive director of the New York Choral Society, I'm accessing artists that I worked with, as a board member of visual aids. So like I mentioned Joyce McDonald, I've done 2 projects with Brendan Fernandez, a queer artist who's a big supporter of visual aids. So, I mean, I think that's a real testament to the power of the organization and the community. It's creating things, but it's also generating other types of ideas, other types of projects that may not necessarily be related to, AIDS or AIDS activism, but it's this community of people who have really deeply felt ideas and motivations about representation and about the role of art to really create an important dialogue.
Right.
Yeah. And one of the things I think also for people, anyone watching who's interested, our website was scrolling across the bottom just a minute ago, visualaids.org. You can go there to see all of the things that we're doing. We do a lot. We publish books. There's a lot of entry points for people if you're interested in art. If you don't know anything about HIV and AIDS, but you're really interested in art, I want to discover really incredible work by artists, particularly lesser known artists. We're a really great resource for discovering artists, those who passed away in the early days of the AIDS crisis, who maybe were unknown, who we're really trying to bring back into the art historical canon. We do large-scale artist monographs and smaller books that are people in conversation. We have exhibitions. We have an exhibition opening this May in New York. You can also see exhibitions. We do an online exhibition every month that's available on our website. So you can see curated exhibitions of work that are all drawn from our archive and our online artist registry.
Can people sign up on there so that they get notifications?
Yep. Right. If you go to visualaids.org, right on the upper right-hand corner of the home page, there's a way to sign up for our email list. We do e-blasts every week or so with things we have coming up. Also, our Instagram is great. If we are visual_aids on Instagram. And because we're such an art-based and visual organization, we always are doing really interesting Instagram posts. Again, if you want to watch some of the videos we commissioned that I was describing, it's video.visualaids.org, very easy to access.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming on tonight, for sharing such incredible information, and really wishing you both the best. I love what you're doing. I believe in the arts. I believe in the arts to communicate. I believe in the arts to heal. So thank you all. I always take a parting shot with my little camera. So everyone look at me, cheese. One more. Really great talking to both of you. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you for everyone who tuned in tonight. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye.